Washington Journal continues.
Our first guest of the morning is Representative Tom Cole. He's the Republican for Oklahoma, serves the 4th District, and serves as a member of both the Appropriations and Budget Committees. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Could you tell us what you've heard about this deal that was tentatively approved, so we're hearing?
Yeah, basically it's a 2-year deal. It will raise the debt ceiling through March of 2017. It's about roughly $80 billion of additional spending, 50 in the first year, 30 in the second. You have to remember that's on a discretionary base of over $1 trillion and a total budget of over 350. Those the additional money is actually paid for in a series of offsets. Some of it involves reform to Social Security disability system, which is saved. It's about to go bankrupt. Others would be things like some sales of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, some changes in crop insurance, which actually would save the federal government about $3 billion. So there's a whole series of relatively minor things like that. But again, first Social Security reform really in about 30 years. And there's also, by the way, a Medicare component of this, which will help offset the additional spending costs as well. So, you know, nobody is going to be popping champagne corks at either end of Pennsylvania Avenue. It's like most of these things, it's a deal. But you have to look at it in terms of the alternative. Absent this deal, we'll have a default within the next couple of weeks, which would, you know, not only would the United States for the first time in its history not pay its bills, you'd see an immediate impact on that in interest rates and the stock market. And second, if you don't reach a deal like this and do the subsequent appropriations bills by December 11th, you're looking at about a $40 billion cut in the American military in a really dangerous time through the sequester process. This saves us from that. So again, a lot of hard bargaining, a lot of compromises. There'll be plenty of people that on both sides can throw rocks at it, but you got to show me what the alternative is that you can get done in divided government.
We heard from many this morning about the deal, particularly those who get disability insurance. So as far as these reforms that happen, is it current people who get that, or would be new disability insurance?
No, it would apply to the current population, but for the most part, they should be for this, because absent this, there'd be a 20% cut in disability payments next year. So this saves the system. One of the things I do like about it is it increases penalties on people who commit fraud in the system. It sets up a new unit to go after, an investigative unit to go after people that do that systematically, and we have quite a bit of it, sadly, in this area. And you know, you're committing fraud, you're really stealing money from people with disability. That's what it amounts to. So I think those things are good. I think, again, we'll sort of cap the payments and link them to the federal poverty program as opposed to the escalator that they're on now. And but overall, still, it's much better than the alternative. Not perfect, but it's better.
Do you expect support from the House Freedom Caucus?
I would be surprised. I would hope they would, but again, I'm not critical of them for that. I mean, they have concerns about a whole variety of things here, and that's legitimate. The real question to me on the Republican side is, can you get a majority of the majority at least? And you know, that'll be the real struggle. I always say there's really 3 groups in the Republican conference. There is the Freedom Caucus, and that's 40 to 60 people, counting folks that are sympathetic but perhaps not members. There's what I'd call a group of governing Republicans that are probably 70 to 100 that are pretty reliable votes for leadership, and you know, would vote for the continuing resolution that kept government funded. And then there's about a same size group, 70 to 90, that I call the, you know, vote no, hope yes crowd. That is, they want to be able to vote no, but they don't want the consequences of it actually failing. But we need a lot of those people, honestly, to step up. If you think it's a good deal and the best deal that we can get under the circumstances, you ought to vote for it. If not, look, I certainly understand it, but please don't expect a minority of Republicans to get the ball across to protect the military, to keep the government from being shut down, to actually get some real reforms in Social Security disability. There are enough things you can go home and talk to people about that are good, that they will like. There are other things that they won't. If you're from an agricultural state, you're not going to like the fact that there's $3 billion less in federal subsidies for agricultural insurance. If you're from which I am from an ag state, if you're from an energy producing state like Oklahoma, the idea that we're going to take you know, oil out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in a period we have low oil prices and a bunch. Now we won't do that immediately. It's over many years, but you know, more oil on the market's not necessarily good news if you're from Texas, Louisiana, or Oklahoma. So everybody has to give some things up here. But the point is, you keep the government functioning, You make sure that people on Social Security disability get paid. You make sure that people on Medicare Part B don't have a 50% increase in their premiums. And most of all, to me, you make sure in a very dangerous time the American military doesn't sustain tens of billions of dollars worth of cuts, while we've got the Chinese rattling cages in the South Pacific, the Russians relitigating the borders of Eastern Europe and sending a force into the Middle East for the first time in 2 generations, Iran sponsoring terrorism, and obviously a functioning terrorist state with ISIL in the heart of the Middle East. Not a time to be cutting the American military.
Our guest with us to talk about this deal and other things going on this week in Congress, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8002 for independents. Our first call for you comes from Jay. Jay is in Oklahoma, Gary, Oklahoma, Republican line. Jay, good morning.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Doing good. How are you?
Just fine. You know, I think as Americans, we need to realize that there has to be some type of fiscal responsibility. We elect officials to govern their paychecks and the money that we send to the government in a responsible way. Every year, the same situation arises. You can't keep spending more. You just can't do it. And at what point, and what is it going to take for that to sink in D.C.?
Well, first of all, I agree with your basic point very much. Honestly, when the Republican majority came in 2011, the annual deficit was $1.4 trillion. This year, it's still too high, but it'll be $439 billion. That's $1 trillion in about a 4.5-year period. It's actually the fastest decline in the deficit ever. But it's not going to be good enough. Eventually, you're going to have to look at entitlement reform, at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Those are the real drivers of the debt. Matter of fact, those 3 programs plus food stamps and interest amount to over 70% of all federal spending. So if you don't make reforms there, you'll never balance the budget. We actually are spending on the discretionary side. That's what's fun, what most people think of as government, the Defense Department, NASA, National Institute of Health, about $150 billion less than when George Bush was president in 2008. And we're spending less than our own first budget called us to spend in 2011. So again, spending, there's been some progress there, but until you get to entitlement reform, you're exactly right. And that's something, honestly, this White House has avoided. We've tried to engage them on that. The Ryan budgets and now the Price budgets both have significant reforms in Medicare and Medicaid. I've got a bill that offers, it's really modeled after what we did in '83 on Social Security, that would set up a commission, force Congress to actually vote on the issue. Those are the kind of tough decisions that we need to do, but they're very hard to get in divided government when the other side's not interested in entitlement reform. But again, deficit has come down fairly dramatically, and Republicans have fought hard to do that.
From Miami, Florida, Billy, you're on. Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you. One comment I'd like to make. When 2 gay men or 2 gay women live together monogamously for 20, 30 years, they pay in a lot of Social Security taxes. They pay a lot of taxes in general. When one dies, the other one is not entitled to that Social Security benefit. So that money goes into like a government slush fund. In our community now, there is a lot of comment with our local leaders that we want that money. It is our money, and we want that money. The fact that the government said, oh, no, you can't get married, but then again, we're going to take the money that you paid in, how convenient that is for the government. When we come after that money, Social Security is going to get, kicked in the leg. So I just wanted to let you people know that gay people are now legislating with their senators and their congressmen that money should go back to us. And I'd like to listen to your comment offline. Thank you, gentlemen. I think you do a great credit to the country.
Well, thank you for calling. Look, I think you have a valid point. Now, I think marriage laws are changing pretty rapidly, and I think government's changing, but that doesn't necessarily rectify what's happened in the past. And we have other groups, too, by the way, that pay in, don't necessarily get back. statistically, that's not a huge problem for Social Security. It's a huge problem for the individuals that are impacted. In terms of the health of the fund itself, the basic problem is a simple one, and it's the downside of a good problem. People are living a lot longer. When Social Security was designed, back in the 30s, the average American didn't make it to 65. The lifespan was 63. Only the government would have a deal for you like that. Hey, you'll be dead 2 years, we'll give you a check. But if you got there, the average person stayed about 5 years. Today, frankly, you get to 65, your chances of getting to 85 are a little bit better than 50%. Your chances of getting into the early 90s are about 25, 30%. Those are good things, by the way. I'm 66. I think this is a really good thing. But it has changed the nature of the system. So beginning about 3 years ago, more money is going out of Social Security than coming in. Now, as the caller rightly says, there are some people that have put money in that aren't able to get everything out. That's true, by the way, if somebody happens to die, they don't get to take the money that they had out, and it doesn't go to their family or somebody else. So there are a lot of groups here, and that's an equity issue that you'd have to look at. But statistically, the main problem is simply we're going to double the number of people on Social Security in the next generation because baby boomer generation's retiring. It's very large. And again, thanks to modern medicine, we live a lot longer. So we're going to have to really look at the system and see how to sustain it because once it goes bankrupt, and it will in about 2033, according to the latest projections, we don't stop paying Social Security, but we only pay the money that comes in. So you'd have an immediate 22% cut in benefits for people in their 70s and 80s. That's not what most Americans want to see happen. So I wish we would get serious about this. My friend John Delaney, who's a Democrat from Maryland, and I actually have a pretty serious proposal, bipartisan, we've introduced in the last 2 Congresses. We've not been able to get either the congressional leadership on either side or the administration particularly interested in it. We're going to keep at it, but sooner or later the math forces you to sit down and deal with Medicare, Medicaid, and particularly Social Security.
Republican line, this is Frank in West Virginia.
Hey.
Good morning.
Morning.
Before I get to what I told the screener I wanted to talk about, which you've already touched on a little bit, I would like to suggest everybody read Tom Colburn's book on waste. I'm sure you know Tom.
Oh, he was my client for when he was in the House for 3 terms, so know him very well. Well, great guy.
I think he's done a better job of pointing out waste than maybe anyone up there. Before Obama got in, he was pointing out how much he could save on fraud and waste and abuse if certain things were done. And I've heard this for years and years and years. If we just pass this bill, we can save so much on fraud, waste, and abuse. Why do we have to pass a bill to do it? Why isn't that done all the time?
Well, it should be done all the time, and some agencies do try and do it. But again, it's cumbersome. It's hard to get at it. Tom did some terrific things, by the way, on fraud in Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, we literally have some units that go after fraud now in a way that we didn't before. I've actually seen several of them work, and they've saved the federal government tens of millions of dollars. So again, it's your point's well taken. Partly, though, these are supercharged issues. When you touch Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that's kind of the third rail of American politics. Everybody thinks the waste is always someplace else than a program that they're interested in. But frankly, there's a great deal of it, and it's the entitlement programs that honestly are the worst. They get less scrutiny because the programs like defense, where there's certainly waste, are at least under review every year. They have to go through the appropriations process. We very seldom stop and give things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security a really hard look. And frankly, they have organized special interest groups that defend them and will say, anytime Congress does anything, my goodness, they're throwing Granny over the cliff, or they're taking away the benefit that you've earned. Congress is very too gun shy, in my view, about actually confronting both these groups and those issues. But if you don't, you'll never balance the federal budget.
Did you have any direct involvement in the creation of this deal?
No, I didn't really. This is really negotiated at the highest levels, and basically between the Speaker, the Majority Leader, the President, and the 2 minority leaders. So it was those individuals and their respective staffs. Now, there's a lot of support done by other committees that answer this question for us or what can we do here. But the main deal has really been negotiated by the leadership of the House, the Senate, and the President.
Did you know it was forthcoming, or did you just find about it last night?
No, I was pretty sure it was coming. I've known the negotiations have been going on for a while, and you try and determine what you can around the edges. And I've got some good friends on all sides in this negotiation, so I call, what can you tell me? What can you tell me?
What did they tell you?
Basically, it's ended up about where they thought it would. On Wednesday and Thursday of last week, I think they went through, they weren't sure it was going to make it, but it looked like sort of 60-40 it might. And you got different perspectives from different sides. But at the end of the day, look, nobody's going to be 100% happy with this thing. But you have to look at it in terms of what the consequences are if it doesn't pass. And do you really want financial disruptions on default? And do you really want massive cuts in the American military? I think the answer to both those questions is no. And are these cuts, is this additional spending paid for? Yeah, it is. Now, some of the ways it's paid for, believe me, there'll be plenty of people that are upset with. But again, I think they spread the sacrifice, frankly, fairly evenly across the board so that no one group can say we were particularly singled out.
As Deputy Whip, how much of a lift then do you have going to members and getting support for this?
Quite a lift. I think there will be a lot of resistance to this. Again, I would think the more conservative elements will very strongly oppose it. I've already read some of the things they said in this morning's papers.
Have any contact you directly?
Well, we were all in conference last night, so we all had a chance to hear one another's initial thoughts. We didn't have all the details of the deal, but they had the broad outline. So it's pretty easy to see where the fault lines are. But I do think it's possible to get a majority of Republicans. I think that will be a lift. I'd say we're pretty certain to have 70 to 90 to start off with. You'd like to grow that, if you will, up to 140 or 50. And then I think the same thing will happen on the Democratic side, probably a little bit better, honestly, although there'll be some heartburn on the Democratic side over changes in Social Security, disability, and over extending the cuts for Medicare providers that already were implemented under the Budget Control Act. They're going to be extended out longer now to help pay for this thing. So again, there's plenty of reasons for people not to like it. They just have to, what I would ask them, give me the alternative that you can actually get passed. That a Republican House will pass, that a closely divided Senate where the Democrats control the filibuster will get passed, and that a liberal president of the United States will get passed. If you've got that kind of arrangement and a system of checks and balances, everybody's going to have to give something out. Nobody can force what they would consider the ideal solution on the other party, and that's been the case around here for about 5 or 6 years.
Noel from New Hampshire, Democrats line. Go ahead.
Hi, yeah, good morning. This is pretty much in that same vein, abuse of different programs, and I'd like to point out some of the abuses that I know are personally in corporate welfare. I do golf course work. I'm a greenskeeper, and I worked in South Carolina, California, here in New Hampshire. And when the superintendents and the assistants, when they go to their meetings and conventions and trade shows, they always call the escort services in those cities and towns. And these conventions are the lifeblood of escort services, and they will come back and, oh boy, we had some girls at $1,000 a night, and we had 3 of them. And that's just with this restricted group of people, and this happens repeatedly over and over. All their liquor is paid for. The women's entertainment, that's all corporate welfare. These guys come down. When the auto industry was in trouble there in Detroit, and they stepped off their corporate jets. Taxpayers paid for them, $35 million corporate jets. They step off these jets, and they got their hand out. Give me some more. Give me some more. And I realize that the politicians in Washington, they take advantage of these programs. So when you want to start cutting abuse and waste, maybe you and your colleagues should find a mirror.
Well, first of all, what you described is not just corporate welfare, it's criminal activity, quite frankly. And, you ought to be talking to the police. If you've got some specific examples like that, that's prostitution, at least as I understood what you had to say. So I would hope you would report that to the appropriate authorities. Second, in terms of looking in the mirror, I think you make a good point. And one of the things that's not, Congress has actually cut its own budget in the last 5 years by 16%. more than it's cut any other part of government, frankly. Congress hadn't had a raise, and I'm not arguing they should. They're fairly well paid. They haven't had a raise since about 2008. By the way, they effectively got a pay cut because they all went on to Obamacare into the system, which raised what they paid in terms of health insurance or in the individual markets like anybody else. I don't say that to give any sympathy for Congress, but I say that just to know that the cuts actually have happened. That's one of the reasons why the deficit's $1 trillion less now today than it was in 2010. That's a good thing. But at the end of the day, you're not going to get to a balanced budget that way. A lot of the low-hanging fruit like that has been picked, so to speak. You really are going to have to sit down and have a fundamental discussion about the cost of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. They're hugely big programs, and frankly, they're going bankrupt. If you don't make some changes there, then you're never going to get a balanced budget. But your basic point that you ought to lead, through personal action, couldn't agree with you more.
Brian from Maryland, hi there.
Good morning, Mr. Cole.
Good morning.
Will you be voting for this?
You know, I haven't read it all. I read almost all of it this morning at 4 o'clock, so my memory may not be as good. Almost certainly, yes. I think, there's some things in it I certainly don't like, and I could give you a list of them. But at the end of the day, I think having financial panic, we've paid our debts as a country since 1789, or really before, in full, on time. And we're the most reliable creditor in the world, in the history of the world. That's something you don't want to change. And second, I think more importantly, to me at least, look, we live in a very dangerous age. We've got thousands of people deployed protecting us every day. Them to have to worry about their funding, or whether or not they're going to have $40 billion worth of cuts, or whether or not they're going to have the training, the equipment, the things they need, I think that'd be criminal. And yet, if we don't act, the Budget Control Act sequester that was laid out that has reduced spending, that's helped lower the deficit, will disproportionately hit the American military, and I just don't think we can afford for that to happen.
Chuck from Phoenix City, Alabama, Republican line, hi.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. I have a big question for Mr. Cole. These people go out of here. If we go out here and we look at the situation America is in today, we can thank all these people down there in Congress and the House and the Senate. They have put this country in the mess we're in today. The only thing they can do is go out here, create more debt. I mean, we're broke. We're giving money to everybody in the world. Nobody gives us anything. Do these people have any business sense at all? I don't think so.
Well, look, we didn't cut the deficit by $1 trillion by doing nothing. When you say these people in Washington, D.C., you got to be, I think, a little more discriminating who and when. This president has racked up more debt than any president in American history. The trajectory on it, by the way, didn't change until the Republican Congress showed up. But to give the president his due, he also got reelected. He's got a veto pinned down there as to what he will and will not accept, and he's got more than enough votes to sustain that. So, we have a divided power. We have a system of checks and balances. We've made some hard-fought progress on the deficit. We got a long way to go. When you say the people have been here, to be fair, and I would not be in this category, but about 2/3 of the people we have been elected since 2010. So they've actually been draining the swamp. Most of these reductions have come with these new members that have arrived. They've run big risk in the Ryan budget and the Price budget, the things they've been willing to take on. They're willing to do that more. I mean, some of them would actually shut down the government, they're thinking that would help. I always like to point out that was tried in 2013, didn't work very well. These kind of hard-fought, agreements that are, if you will, incremental and cumulative are about the only way we have until we have the White House. And, we've got the ability to do what the Democrats could do in 2009 and 2010. Supermajorities in both houses and the president, you can get a lot done in a short period of time. Otherwise, you've got to claw and scrap for every single thing you get.
Some would say that, why not use a potential shutdown to have arguments about spending? Why not use the debt ceiling to have arguments about spending?
I would argue these things, number one, they never work. People that argue for shutdowns can never show one that worked, and they usually have to say, well, if we'd have just kept it shut down longer, it'd be better. I don't think you advance your cause by making things worse for the American people. When you shut down the government, things get worse for different individuals every single day while that process goes on. By the way, it's always expensive because we never dock the pay of people that don't work in that period of time. We always go back and make it up, and usually have to pay more in overtime as they catch up on the work they weren't able to do on a regular basis. So it's financially counterproductive, and it's politically ineffective. So it's an inappropriate tool. If you want to change things, go win some elections. Now, we've changed the trajectory just by taking the House back and now the Senate. But at the end of the day, it's pretty frustrating if the other side can veto anything that you do. And by the way, the Democrats had this frustration in 07 and 08. They had the House and they had the Senate. And I remember in the time people yelling at them, stop the Iraq War, do this or that. They couldn't. Because they couldn't override a presidential veto. They had to work hard and go win the presidency. That's what I tell my friends on our side of the aisle. It matters who's president of the United States. Don't think they don't count in the political equation, even when they don't have majorities, because that's a very powerful office with a very strong veto and a great bully pulpit and, essential control of the executive branch. So, if you want to make the greatest single change, then make sure you win the next presidential election.
Our guest, Representative Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma, a member of the Appropriations and Budget Committees, also serves as Deputy Whip. Next call, Mason from Ohio. You're on with our guest. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you so much for taking my call. I have three things that I wanted to point out. The first being, when we start talking in the budget about cutting or reforming programs such as Medicaid, Medicare, and disability, you really need to look at what is happening outside of those programs to put so much pressure on them. For instance, I was born with a disability. I worked all my life. I knew at some point I may have an injury that I would need some time off for, so I protected myself by having disability insurance. And unfortunately, I had a large incident happen where I had spent 10 years for an international company having a great time managing my own disability when this injury came along. My personal disability that I paid for, after 2 years, shifted their burden from them, who I paid, to Social Security disability. And that was okay because that alleviated their own burden to their shareholders. But it's not right because it added additional stress onto the Social Security program, which, by the way, Obama, with the Affordable Care Act, actually extended insolvency quite a long way, and that hadn't been done for a long time. And when you sit there and say that Obama and the Democrats have spent so openly not caring, I got to say, actually, it was President Bush having multiple wars on the credit card that they didn't pay for, as well as getting us into a large hole that was one of the worst since the Great Depression. Now, if you want to claim that the GOP, is fiscally responsible, then you have to prove that by not just saying it, by actions, like not wasting $1.4 million on wasteful hearings that don't go anywhere, like Benghazi, or giving the rich even more perks than they already have and not having them pay their fair share.
Mason, we'll let our guests respond to what you
well, a lot there to talk about. And first, I think your caller makes a good point about Social Security disability. Look, what's done in this agreement, as far as I can tell on the initial read, is to try and save it, to try and protect it. Now, we do know, by the way, it's also a program where there's been a considerable amount of abuse. But when you talk considerable amount, that means 9+ people out of every 10 are using it appropriately and are using it for what it was intended to. But we've had a tremendous expansion in the numbers there. We needed reform. We haven't done anything for 30 years. We need some fraud units. So those things are good. In terms of the fiscal discussion, we can debate this a lot of different ways. I guess I could argue that every year the Democrats were in power in the House and the Senate, from 07 to 11, the deficit went up. And this was before the fiscal crisis of late 2008. And every year the Republicans have been in power since then, the deficit has come down. Now, I would just argue, believe me, if we're lowering the deficit, it's not because it's easy to do. When we're spending less money than we were spending on the discretionary part of the budget when George Bush was president of the United States, those are real spending cuts, very painful cuts in many cases. So again, I would stack our record up with anybody else's, but the bottom line is, and I think you make this point, both sides here have a lot to answer for. Both sides have overpromised in a lot of programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and then not done the course corrections you need to do as the demographics underneath those programs have changed. As the baby boomer generation retires, as people live longer, those things change, what we can expect. And you have to sit down on a regular basis legislatively and deal with them. Neither party has been willing to do that consistently. And frankly, I have to give Paul Ryan a lot of credit. The first guy I've ever seen put it in a budget and pass the budget 4 consecutive years to make some of those changes with Paul Ryan. But he couldn't get his budget through the Senate, and frankly, he couldn't get much agreement from the White House. Hopefully, the next administration, by the way, whether it's Democrat or Republican, the budget deficit is going to go back up. I mean, the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, issued a report about this early this year that just about the time the president leaves, then most of the savings will have been made in various areas, and the growing retirement population will start pushing that deficit in Medicare and Social Security right back up again. So the next president is either going to have to sit down and deal with this or try to run for re-election in an era of a rising deficit, probably something that neither a Republican or a Democrat would want to do. So I think we're probably a couple years away from sitting down, probably in the first and second year of the new president, whoever that is, term, and having a real serious discussion about entitlement reform and hopefully tax reform as well, because there I think you make another point. Our tax code is riddled with inconsistencies, with credits, with gimmicks. Now, we might argue as to who is overtaxed and who's not and what's the best way to do that, but I don't think there's much argument that major tax reform needs to happen. So that's probably 1 and 2 on the next president's domestic agenda.
We have a viewer off of Twitter asking, how will the passage of the proposed budget deal affect Representative Paul Ryan's nomination for Speaker?
It may complicate it some. Some of the people that will oppose the deal will try and drag him into this debate or discussion. I do not know how Representative Ryan's going to vote on the deal or where he is, and it's my understanding he was not particularly part of this negotiation. But, if you oppose the deal, then some people might be inclined to oppose Mr. Ryan. I would hope not. And again, it depends on where you oppose him. We have a conference election. There's going to be a contest there. Representative Daniel Webster is running. Nothing wrong with that. Others may choose to run, and others certainly looked at it. I think it'll probably just be those two, but who knows? Vote how you like. But when the conference makes a decision, normally what happens is when you go to the floor, the conference unites and supports the conference nominee. So it's really a question of who people will vote for on the floor of the House of Representatives. You can't expect the Democrats to vote for Paul Ryan. So if you lose too many people and you don't reach the requisite 50% plus 1 of those present and voting, then you could have turmoil. My hope is Representative Ryan's personal reputation, which is stellar, his performance, as budget chairman, as Ways and Means chairman, his performance as vice presidential nominee, the fact that he's uniformly regarded as a very conservative individual, will hold the votes there.
As you say that, though, some members of the Freedom Caucus have expressed concerns about it. One of the guests we had last week was Representative Tim Huelskamp, talked a little bit about Paul Ryan, some reservations he may have. I want you to listen to him and get your response.
And I mentioned 60% of Republicans not only feel let down, but they feel betrayed by the Republican establishment in Washington, D.C. And again, simply changing one leader for another is not going to assure them. There are some concerns about a number of Paul Ryan's positions. I mean, he has certainly been a leader on budget and fiscal issues and the need for entitlement reform. But on the other hand, his views on comprehensive immigration reform and a number of other issues weigh heavily in the minds of our voters out there. But they're going to explore, they're going to understand a little more about Paul Ryan if he does move forward. But we're looking for changes in structure, changes that would change how the House is operated in a very closed manner. Again, just because you're from Wisconsin or California or Virginia or Ohio doesn't mean your voters should have more of a say in the process. We need to open it up, and for far too long, conservatives have been attacked, marginalized, and ridiculed by leadership, and that's the base of the Republican Party, and I think the base of the Republican Party's principles are conservative ideals. We hope that we'll have leadership that will reflect them rather than attack them.
Well, I think in terms of opening up the process, there's a great deal I could probably agree with Representative Yuleskamp about. Look, I'm an appropriator. I want every appropriations bill to come to the floor under regular order and open rule, which means any member can come down and amend it. We did that to 6 bills this year. We had to stop, partly because of this flap over the Confederate flag issue. We had people afraid to vote on the Confederate flag, and so we stopped a $30 billion bill. So on those kinds of things, he and I probably find a lot of common ground. I'm going to differ with him a little bit on this idea, though, that, quote, conservatives aren't represented. This is the most conservative Republican conference probably in history. Even in the 1990s, they couldn't pass things like the Ryan budget. Even in the 1990s, when they balanced the budget, they never cut discretionary spending. This conference has done that, and they never did any serious entitlement reform other than on welfare. This, again, on the so-called doc fix, now this Social Security disability, this Congress has actually fought and won some victories in those areas. So I think it's a very conservative conference across the board. Where we tend to disagree is not on the issues. Where we tend to disagree is the tactics. We do have an element that wants to shut down the government, that think that's a winning strategy. I would just invite them to go back and look at October of 2013 and tell me if they won. And I don't think we did. Obamacare is still here. And if we hadn't had the disaster rollout of Obamacare, we'd have probably paid a pretty stiff price for shutting down the government the next year. I wouldn't count on getting that lucky twice. Now, in terms of the conference elections, Tim and I agree, look, they ought to be wide open. Anybody that wants to ought to go run. And that's what's happening right now. And I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Even if you back a candidate that's not successful, you have an opportunity to make points. And the other guys want a united conference. If Paul Ryan wins, he's going to want to bring these people in. So last point is, the real question is, do you do it on the floor? And if you do it on the floor, what you do is basically work with Nancy Pelosi and 188 Democrats to choose who the next speaker is going to be. That's a very dangerous, risky thing. And it's not an act of defiance, not against Paul Ryan or John Boehner. It's basically an act of defiance against your whole conference. And you're not the majority in the conference. You're 30, 40 people in a 247-member body. You get your choice to have your say. You shouldn't then try and deny the 200 or so that will easily be with Ryan their choice.
If he gets the position, how do you think Paul Ryan will be different from John Boehner?
I think, first of all, he's a more visionary and policy-oriented guy in some ways. I think he's a superb communicator. I think we saw that when he was a vice presidential nominee. So I think you'll see the Ryan vision, if you will, elevated. And that's something to be good for conservatives. I mean, we need to have this discussion about basic issues. I think, by nature, and I served on the Budget Committee when Paul was chairman, he's very open, very inclusive. He empowers members. He listens to them. You know what he's planning. You know what he's thinking. Your input is sought and solicited. I'm not saying that's not true of John Boehner, by the way, who I think has been a very good and very underrated speaker. I look at the guy and I say, look, he's lowered the deficit by $1 trillion. He got most of the Bush tax cuts extended and then made permanent. He got the first entitlement reform. He got rid of earmarks, and he did all that while Barack Obama was president every day of his speakership, and the Democrats controlled the Senate. So he did a lot. I think Ryan has the chance, though, to build on that and go further. And I think generationally, the change is a good thing for the Republican Party. I think he'll be a very interesting either workmate or counterpoint to the next president of the United States.
Let's hear from Ron in North Miami Beach, Florida. Hello.
Hi, and good morning,
Morning.
Congressman. I want to know, would you be in favor of a system that would multiply benefits, let's say 10% of it, of any entitlement that's coming out, that 10% of those benefits could be allocated through a proven system that would enhance that 10% and multiply it, not through the stock market, but through, for example, we have systems, cashback systems, coupon discount systems currently circulating in the American economy that would multiply a certain percentage of those benefits. And through that multiplication, Congressman, what it would do, it would spurn retail and merchant activity because a lot of the activity is now more cyclic because most of the benefits now are linear benefits, and once you give them out, of course, we know people have to live, but it could be safe to say that a smaller bit of that money might go to a little waste. So let's say with the government, would you consider a system that would advocate involuntarily, let's just say just 10% of those benefits and run it through a proven enhancement system?
Okay.
Well, I would need to, obviously, as they say up here, see the paper on that. I'm not sure I 100% get your idea, but broadly speaking, I am in favor of things that increase individual options and control, that provide a measure of flexibility that aren't one size fits all. Look, I am a believer in the Social Security system. I think it's something that has served the country well. It's lowered poverty among seniors. It's provided a floor, and frankly, in many ways, it's the most popular, most successful anti-poverty program in American history if you look at where seniors were before Social Security and where they are today, particularly when you couple it with Medicare benefits. So it's worked. But it's also, got some real flaws in it, and the demographics are changing underneath it, so you're going to have to change it. If there are ways to, quote, multiply, and I'm not sure what those would be, some of it might be, participating. I've been for individual accounts in Social Security before, things that would provide people flexibility. Those type of things I'd be open to, but again, with all due respect, I just need to see it. I'm not sure that I have a full grasp on what you were laying out.
From Chillicothe, Virginia, Teresa.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I have a question. The government has used the money that's paid into Social Security for years for other things and put IOUs in it and never paid it back. They talk about entitlement reform. We have paid into Social Security our whole life. Now they've put people on there that's worked and hasn't worked enough to really get Social Security. They get SSI disability, but it's coming out of Social Security. Obama has cut Medicare $700 and some billion to pay for Obamacare. I have seen seniors go in the hospital, get jerked out of there because Medicare will only pay for so many hours, but they will tell them if they're on Medicaid, they could stay as long as they like for whatever reason. Shouldn't Medicaid have the same restrictions as Medicare? All these immigrants that he has brought in here, the 90-some% of them I read in the paper is on Medicaid, food stamps, welfare, and they're entitled to our Social Security now. That'll finish bankrupting it. What about all of us that has paid into it our whole lives? Should we not be protected? I'm a widow. My husband was a veteran. He paid into it. They get to keep that. Now they want to cut what I'm getting, and it's not fair to all of us that's paid into it our whole lives. And you see the government. I read an article that Harry Reid put up for the Senate to get $14,000 a month retirement and only have to serve one term to get it.
Well, let me respond to that, because I don't know what Harry Reid proposed, but I can tell you that's just not the case. What you read on the internet and what reality is in terms of congressional benefits are two vastly different things in many cases. Nobody gets $14,000 a month retirement, and to get the full retirement, you got to serve decades. I mean, it's not what people think. In terms of, you raise a lot of good points. You're certainly right that people that have paid into Social Security ought to have their benefits fully protected. They're fully vested in the system. I don't know of a single plan out there, by the way, that calls for reducing anybody's benefits that's currently on Social Security or anywhere near to Social Security retirement. Most of the reform proposals actually, just like in '83, the last time we reformed it, started with people in their 30s, not with people in their 60s. So I think that's unlikely. I'd also disagree with you a little bit when you say that we put IOUs in the system when we spent the money. Look, the law's pretty clear on this. And when there was years of surpluses, we were supposed to buy government bonds. That's exactly what the government did. And right now, we're in deficit in Social Security, which means fewer taxes are coming in. I haven't noticed anybody missing a Social Security check because they're drawing down those government bonds. So, we could argue whether or not it should have gone into the stock market or in index funds. That's a legitimate argument. But this idea that money has been stolen out of Social Security is just not true. And again, I'm still looking for the person that tells me they had a Social Security check and it either got cut or they were told they weren't going to get it anymore. The government absolutely will continue that commitment. In terms of illegal immigrants, it's a trickier problem here than you might suggest. First of all, in many cases, illegals pay in and never get anything out. And actually, most of the studies we have is they're a net contributor to the Social Security system. They're not a net detractor. Now, if you immediately legalized people and allowed them to get a full Social Security benefit for the time they'd been here illegally, your point would be worth talking about. But right now, that's not the main system. The main challenge to the system is simply this: the baby boom generation didn't have nearly as many kids as their parents did, and they are living a lot longer. And so they are now drawing more money out than they paid in. And remember, that money doesn't just stack up someplace. Social Security is basically a pay-as-you-go system. Always has been. The first group of recipients of Social Security did not spend 40 years paying in and then draw out. They were getting money, and that, by the way, would be like my grandfather and perhaps your grandparents as well. And it kept them out of poverty. Again, they worked hard their whole lives too. So I don't go back and try and rewrite history and say we should have done it differently. But this system has never been designed to accumulate vast reserves that then you would draw down. We had a period of time from '83 until about 2013 where we were running surpluses. And that was because Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill and Howard Baker and the Social Security system sat down and they made some changes in the 80s. And they raised the cost of Social Security, they raised the taxes, they raised the age of eligibility. I can't retire at 65 the way my dad did. It's 66 for me, it's 66 for my son. They increased what businesses paid into it. We've changed Social Security about 20 times since we initially passed it. All I'm saying is you're going to have to change it again. But what's driving it is not illegal immigration, not people stealing money out of it, not people having spent reserves. People are living longer, and there's more of them. And that's, by the way, not a bad thing in my view. That's a good thing, but you better make some adjustments or we're going to lose what's really an important source of revenue for every American in their 60s and beyond.
One more call. This is Bill, Mobile, Alabama, Democrats line.
Yes, good morning. Regarding helping Social Security, what is the resistance to doing something that I've heard offered many times, and that is taking the cap off of those who earn more than $128,000, I think it is. I'm not sure the exact figure, to pay the additional taxes for those people in that income bracket. I've never heard it proposed in Congress, and I'm assuming that even though everyone says, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, why don't we do that? Can you explain to me what is the resistance against doing that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, first of all, I can say this as a guy that used to own a small business. If you're a small business person, you're not only paying your 6.2%, whatever it is, you're matching at 6.2%. And so, we have raised, by the way, this cap. It was originally at $4,300 back in the 30s. We adjusted up for inflation every year. Now, I think it's actually about 118 or 19,000, but, you're certainly in the ballpark with what you suggest. And I think that's going to be one of the items that's discussed. But if you're paying at the upper end now, honestly, you now pay more in than you're going to draw out on average. And so it's how much more do you want to make people pay beyond what they can legitimately get in a benefit? If you're at the bottom end of the income brackets, you're actually drawing more than you probably ever put in. Again, nothing wrong with that. You played by the rules and you paid there, but there's just a question of how much you want to raise the taxes. If we had a commission that met, I suspect that would be one of the things on the table. So would the rate at which it increases, so-called chain CPI. So would the age level, since we're living so much longer. I think there's a lot of things. Perhaps you raise it faster for people at the bottom than you do for people at the very top. Warren Buffett probably doesn't need the same Social Security or Medicare benefit that Ma and Pa Kettle on the farm do. That's just the reality of it. So we need to look at these things again. But you also, if you just simply raise the cap, you would fund Social Security, you would actually overfund it pretty rapidly. So you're looking for the right kind of balance, and you got to ask yourself about the basic equity of making other people pay more into a system that they cannot draw the benefit out of when it's supposed to be a self-insurance program that we all participate in and employers match.
Representative Tom Cole, a member of the Appropriations and Budget Committees and a Deputy Whip. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll continue our conversation, not only taking a look at the budget, but also discussions about transportation and infrastructure funding. Our guest is going to be Representative John Garamendi of California. He serves on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He'll talk about the vote, the budget, plans for a long-term solution. He'll join us next, later on in the program. Bradford Fitch, President and CEO of the Congressional Management Foundation, will be here to talk about the newly proposed spending rules for members of Congress. Washington Journal continues after this. Thank you.